Hello and welcome. My name is Julia Trickey and I'm a UK botanical artist and tutor. But for the last 4 years, I've also been hosting online talks where fellow artists from all around the world share their botanical art, projects and passions. So I'm going to give you a speedy tour of the talks from last year now. So I'm going to be sharing images and short extracts and also for this time introducing you to some of this year's speakers. Now, if you have any comments, please use the Q&A box, but be aware that there will be limited time to answer questions, I'm thinking, on this occasion, because I've got a lot to get through in an hour. So, during 2024, I hosted 22 sessions with leading artists, some of which you can see here. Now, if you're a botanical artist, you may well recognise some of these names and faces. Of course, if you're not, hopefully by the end of this session, you may be a little more familiar with their work and with the world of botanical art. So, one of the most prestigious exhibitions to be involved with as a budding botanical artist is the Royal Horticultural Society's Botanical Art and Photography Show in London. That's quite a mouthful. With exhibitors applying from all around the world for this much sought after wall space. So this exhibition is held in partnership with the Saatchi Gallery, which is in London. And those applying for the show are expected to work to the highest standards. So Charlotte Brooks, who is the RHS art curator, shared with us behind the scenes insights of what goes into putting together this annual show. So from the selection meeting right through to transport, packaging and framing and installation of the show. Here is Charlotte now introducing a selection of last year's exhibitors, who, by the way, had small cameo appearances during the online talk, talking about how they prepared their paintings.
And here I'm just going to introduce Amelia Grass, who lives and works in South Wales, and her exhibit was Overlooked: Wildflowers in the Restored Meadows of Glyntaff in South Wales. Next, we're going to hear from Anne Saywood, who lives and works in Devon, also a first-time exhibitor with her set of pictures, Sarracenia, the trumpet pitcher plants of North America. Following on from that, we will hear from Anne Hayes, also a first-time exhibitor from Australia with her Banksia serrata images. Then Dalian Root, she lives and works in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, a first-time exhibitor and also recipient of an RHS bursary. Dalian's South African orchids with specialised pollination interactions won Best Botanical Artwork as well as the People's Choice Award and a gold medal. Giacomina Furillo will follow from Dalian, and we see here her fabulous exhibit Memento, another first-time exhibitor who lives and works in Surrey. Following on, we will hear from Hyunjin Cho, who lives and works in California in the US, with her exhibit of Succulents Studied in Stippling. Following, we will see something in contrast, an exhibit by Ingrid Arthur of the Shetland Garden. And Ingrid lives and works in Edinburgh and Fife in Scotland, another first-time exhibitor. And then we'll hear again from another British artist, and this is Linda Pitkin, who lives and works in South Croydon in the UK. She gave us a fabulous exhibit, Native British Woodland Wildflowers. And then we will hear from Lynn Upton, another Australian artist who lives and works in Tasmania, another first-time exhibitor for her exhibit of the genus Richia, a relic of Gondwana. She was awarded a gold medal and Best Botanical Art Exhibit. And then finally, we will hear from Tony Dade, who exhibited with us back in 2021, who currently lives and works in Portugal, and we will hear about her exhibit of Magnolia grandiflora, from bud to desiccated seed pod.
So each of the artists featured explained to us how they prepared for the show. So they had up to 5 years from being selected to exhibiting. So preparatory drawings and studies were crucial during this time. And the importance of sketchbooks was the focus of Lucy Smith's talk in March. Now, Lucy has written a thorough guide to botanical sketchbooks. And during her talk, she explained what a botanical sketchbook is and what it might contain. Now, I'm going to whiz through the following slides, but remember, if you don't already know, you will get a copy linked to the recording. So at a later date, you can always pause and read the text, which is very useful and interesting. But what is in a botanical sketchbook? Well, Lucy was encouraging us that we could use it for drawings, preparatory drawings, also drawings with some colour. A botanical sketchbook can be a curated space, drawings of special collections or almost a visual diary. It contains colour studies where you're experimenting, capturing the correct colour. It would obviously, I would have thought, contain observations and notes, maybe on the botany of the plant, and also field sketches. As part of Lucy's talk, she told us about one of her most enjoyable drawing days when she was preparing material for this book.
Most enjoyable drawing day, Sunday. It's very specific because I wrote it on the book. Sunday, 2nd of October, 2022, from 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. And my big oak tree that I love is just here. It's just around the corner from me. And there's this wild apple tree which had these branches hanging down. I thought, how perfect a drawing spot is that? I've got it right in front of me. And I just sat there for the whole afternoon drawing as the sun set behind me. And I've just got a tiny clip here you can see showing you the scene.
The end of a perfect afternoon drawing.
And that's the double page spread on the Venezia book that I did of that drawing. And I was going to colour it and do all sorts of things, but I got very attached to the drawing because I just loved those few hours that I spent. It was one of those days where it was getting a bit chilly and I thought, oh, I should go out and do a drawing. I don't really want to. And once I did, I thought, oh gosh, I'm so glad I did it. And that's another aspect of the sketchbook. It kind of makes you push yourself to do your practice and find yourself in lovely spots like that.
So recording plant communities was also at the heart of Lara Gastinger's talk. So she encouraged us to identify and draw plant communities and giving us reasons why this is important in this day and age. Including fighting plant blindness. Now, this plant blindness is the inability for humans to notice and distinguish the plants around them. And Lara is well known for her perpetual journals, but she also shared with us other plant community projects that she has been involved in. And that includes her 10 walks in Virginia, which she exhibited at the RHS in 2007. And here is a collection of her garden seeds. And this was a project of plants that she depicted during the pandemic. And there's a lot of a backstory to this. So if you can ever hear Lara talking about this, it's well worthwhile. So Işik Gunër is a Turkish artist who also likes to get out and about and to find her subject matter in the field. And she took us on some of her favourite trips to favourite regions in her homeland of Turkey, where she can find the most spectacular plants growing in their natural habitat. Işik explained how she finds and collects her subjects, with permission I have to add, and then she takes the specimens back to her accommodation to start recording as soon as possible. If you're an artist, you know that something will start fading the minute you pick it or the minute it's out of water. And here you can see her work in progress and the final illustration for this rather complicated plant. Another focus of Ishik's talk was this peony, which, look at the amazing setting here where she found this growing wild, and she just felt she had to draw it. She does a lot of research. She collects information about plants that she's going to depict. She keeps a lot of comprehensive notes, and here you can see a press specimen as well. This is a bit tantalising because it's a very short part of her talk when she talked about how she began the picture, but we're just going to see her starting out painting the stamens.
This is Paeonia muscula, a beautiful plant native to Turkey. In this video, I will talk about how to paint a complex center. At this stage, I will only mark the stamens with paint. This will help me to paint the center and the rest of the plant more easily, more secure. The color of the anthers are quite orangey. To start with, I will use cadmium yellow and mix that with cadmium lemon, more bright yellow. As a start, I'm preparing more bright yellowish color to be able to create some highlights for the base. Before I start marking, with a petri rubber, I will take the excess of graphite. I can even erase some of it, so I just have a very clean marks at the base that I can still see. So now I will simply draw it again with the paint, and this is a quite dense mix of paint. I will simply start to paint one by one, focusing on their shape and the angle. It is important to have a very clear and accurate drawing to start with, but sometimes flowers fade away fast, so a more rapid drawing is needed. In such cases, all the drawing mistakes, inaccuracies must be corrected at this stage. Starting on a clean base with almost no graphite is essential to be able to do that. For the filaments, I'm using permanent rose and mix it with the color of the anthers to have some warm pink. I first mark the center, basically just to define its shape and not to lose it when I'm painting the rest. Direction of the filaments will determine the three-dimensionality and the volume, so we must be very careful and slow. If you are finding so difficult to draw both edge of the filaments, so you can only draw the shadow sides.
And here, as if by magic, is the final painting. And she did share more of the process, but I'm afraid there's no time to watch all of that here. But it's so important, isn't it, to understand the botany of plants and how they work. And this was the focus of Roger Reynolds' talk. Now, Roger is part of IAPI, which is the Institute for Analytical Plant Illustrators. And he came to talk to us on behalf of IAPI about the different parts of flowers and their function. So we're just going to hear him refer to sepals here.
Sepals are protective. Here they are doing their job, protecting the bud as it grows, and when the bud is mature, the flower opens out. The sepals have done their job. They're now peeling back and exposing the petals for business, as it were. Notice that in this case, they have not just peeled back, but actually rolled back, so that they're now pointing in the opposite direction almost from when they were on the bud. This process is called reflexing. If you take, for example, buttercups, there are 3 British buttercups that you find commonly in fields. And you can always tell if you just look underneath the buttercup head that the bulbous buttercup actually gets reflex sepals, whereas the other 2 that might be growing with it don't. So sepals don't just sort of end up opening when the flower opens and stopping, they might go on to do other things as well.
Roger was keen to emphasise that top quality botanical illustrations depend upon an appreciation of the nature and sequence of these changes. We're capturing a moment in time, but we need to know how the different parts are in that moment in time. Pamela Taylor's talk gave us an insight into her depiction of trees, which she does in ink. She shared with us some of her early work, including this one here, and also the materials that she uses, the equipment that she uses for a pen. So she also has exhibited at the RHS. You can see how important this show is. And so we looked at some of the recent trees that she'd been depicting. So here's an example of a chosen tree. And here are her initial drawings. So she's extracting the bit of tree from its surrounding, as it were. And here's her final pen and ink study. Here's another example from the same RHS set of paintings. Again, her initial drawings and her final study. And these were at the RHS, like I say, and she had 6 paintings on display, as you can see here. So pen and ink. I'm quite proud that these talks have different people who work in different styles and different media. So Mindy, Lighthype, actually came to talk to us and explained her use of undertonal drawing and her love of granulating pigments. So you can see some of Mindy's work here, and she loves to include insects as well in her paintings. But here is a little extract of her talk where she is talking about undertonal drawing.
And so here is a sort of, this is a tonal drawing. I do a full-blown tonal drawing. And this is just like, I think it's just about a minute. And as you can see, I have my paint over to the side. I'm using a very big brush. I am not, I haven't wet the painting beforehand. I've just loaded this big number 10 watercolor brush, and I'm just systematically going over it and adding the color onto the surface. You can see my my palette on the side. It's a porcelain palette, and I've mixed up some different shades of green in there, but my brush is completely wet, and I've just been dipping in and just going along the painting. And you can see that the graphite is not moving around, or the tonal drawing is not moving around. And that's because I've either used a 2H pencil, or I have used a the colored pencil. And it's kind of amazing. I like this technique because it allows me to really see where my lights and darks are going to be. And so once I get that first layer in, I can let it dry, and I can come in and add some more detail to it. So it actually, it's just an amazing thing, because all of a sudden I feel like I have a finished painting. That I would say that 75 or 90% of the work is in the tonal drawing, and the painting is almost like coloring in a coloring book.
So now we're going to look at the talk by Sandrine Morrish called Revamp Your Palette. Now Sandrine has thought and written quite a lot about botanical art, both articles for magazines and blog posts, but also she has written a couple of books about botanical art, and she's particularly passionate about colour. Here's some of her work, but her talk very much focused on colour, her colour theories. She also helped us understand how different brands vary, but also she was encouraging us to revamp our palette.
So this is all about setting up. Phase 2 is making space and streamlining your palette, really. So the first thing to do is to check the quality of your current paints. Is there a color in your palette that is fugitive? Is there a paint that is particularly opaque? Do you have some colors that have too many pigments in the formulation, so when you mix them with others they turn muddy? Do you have some pigments that are just too toxic or environmentally unfriendly, or you're not comfortable with using them and you would like to replace them? So consider getting rid of those and then replacing them with a better alternative. There's always an alternative. It's never going to be exactly the same, but there's always something close enough that you can make it work. Number 4 is check the relevance of the paints that you have. Is there a color in there that you haven't used, say, in 2 years? To be generous. If you haven't used one of your paints in about, I would even say 1 year, but let's give it 2 years. I know it's not easy to get rid of a paint. Then it's probably because you don't need it. And I had that with Mineral Violet here. I had a color called Mineral Violet and another one called Rose of Ultramarine. They were in my palette because when I tested them, I thought they were very beautiful. And so I put them in my palette. But I can't even remember when I used either of those. So they've gone and they're not in the new version.
Someone else who is very passionate about colour and how she uses it in her painting is Susannah Blaxill. Now, I first came across Susannah Blaxill when I was a student at Botanical Art about 20 years ago, and this to this day is still one of my favourite botanical paintings. And Susannah is, by her own admission, happy to paint things which are fairly mundane, although I don't think the way she paints them is mundane, as you can see here. But she uses a whole range of colours within her painting. Let's just listen to her giving us an insight into her ways of working.
Now we'll go to watercolours on black backgrounds. I painted, I should tell you how I do the black backgrounds. I masked out the subject, and then I have a spray gun, and I mix up black gouache and put it through the spray gun. I put this on the floor. I put the sheet of paper on the floor with the pomegranates actually masked out, and then I spray from a height very, very slowly. I let each layer dry, and there are a lot of layers on, so I don't go too fast, and I make sure I've covered the area properly. One of the things I really enjoyed were the seeds, because they're so faceted and see-through. So that was such fun to paint. Difficult, you know, it wasn't easy. I found it difficult. And I loved the flesh on the inside. That was fun. Just have a look on the right-hand side, on the top of the pomegranate. You'll see that the colors change as well from the left-hand side of the fruit to the right-hand side. I've used a blue and a yellow in the left-hand side for the light, and then more of a pink and yellow on the light side of the pomegranate. The light changes color over the surface. Now the next one is a camellia called Star Above Star. This is in the Shirley Sherwood collection. Now again, I painted the black in the same way, drifting the black down onto the paper from quite a height. Again, you'll notice the change in the color of the leaves. The right-hand leaf heading up towards the corner, there's actually quite a lot of pink and purple in that leaf, but you'll see the underneath is actually quite a pale yellow. So again, I've constantly changed the colors because that, I think, interests me in order to make the painting come alive. Then the next painting is quite an early painting when I first started painting on black, of mushrooms, aging mushrooms. I think when I look at it now, I realize that I could have changed, I could have actually put more shadow on the bottom of these mushrooms. And I certainly do that now. But again, it was painted quite a long time ago, and I learned such a lot all the time. You'll notice on the right-hand mushroom, you'll notice as the stem comes down to the bottom, it has that lovely sort of strange smoky purple. So I put that in because it's interesting. I enjoy doing that. But I mean, I could improve on that now if I could do it again.
So Julia Patience, now let's look at her work. She spoke to us about her work from photographs in watercolour and ink. So here are some of her first attempts at botanical painting. And here are some of her paintings for the Society of Botanical Artists show. This one in 2018 in Madrid, and these paintings from 2019, which she was awarded, got an award for those, and in 2022 as well. Now, during her talk, as 2023, she talked to us about how she used Photoshop and how she used the different tools to isolate her plants, just to plan her compositions by using reference photos. So here we are. Here's this in process, and then you can see her painting. Like I say, if you were at the talk, this would make more sense to you in terms of how she used Photoshop. But here's the final painting. So quite an unusual composition where the plant is bursting out from the background. Úrsula Romero. Some of you will know Úrsula, formerly known as Inky Leaves. She was known particularly for her collection of larger than life leaf paintings. But when she came to talk to us, she had been focusing on roses for a while. She'd been collecting rose petals and working on a whole series. So we saw some of her work, which is still, as you can see here, much larger than life. But it was an honour and privilege, because I've never seen her paint, to watch her do a short demonstration.
So I will dance around my painting. So I'm going to put a first layer in there, and then I'm going to come in. This is nowhere near done. It's going to need lots of refining and more layers. So now I'm going to go in here. The reason I hop around my painting, and I paint quite quickly, I don't know if you noticed that from the video I put on my Insta stories, but I do paint very quickly. The reason I jump around is because I don't want my paper to cockle. I do work on 638 GSM, and I'm working on Sanders Waterford. So it shouldn't cockle, but I would rather just make sure that it definitely doesn't. So sometimes I put water down first, and sometimes I don't. It depends how much I think I can paint quickly. Because I've put the ox gall in my water, I can cover more before it dries. Pink is super, super pink. It's not opera rose. Can I just say, I'm not using any opera rose for this collection because that pigment is not stable. Yeah, definitely avoiding the opera rose. Because as I said before, I kind of want all my paintings to be of museum quality. So that comes with a sort of standard. Go back in, make this darker. To make it super dark, I'm going to put some Windsor blue in. Can't really see what's going on because my light is so bright here. I've got a daylight bulb.
Are you using tubes, or you were showing us pans, but you're getting such strong colours? Have you sort of squeezed?
It's a good question. I'm using pans. What I do, I use tubes for my leaves just because I go through so much colour. But for this, I will dip my pan in my water before I start so that it's all wet.
Okay, so it's quite soft, as it were.
It's soft, yeah. Just speeds things up for me.
In total contrast, Sarah Jane Humphrey does botanical illustration for packaging. So she talked to us about how to turn botanical illustrations into packaging projects. So she talked about illustrating books. She also illustrates magazine articles, and she has done a number of packaging designs too.
So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Brewdog label. So when I was working on this rum bottle, the art direction was really clear. So it came about, they'd seen my work previously and they liked the style, and they'd asked me for a sort of really bold and punchy style with that lovely opaqueness from gouache. This is a full illustrated sheet. So I actually illustrated this just as one complete artwork, which is huge. I think it's A1 in size. I think I just had the idea that maybe it might be nice as a sort of final painting rather than doing lots of separate sort of spot illustrations. And they had given me, as part of the brief, I knew the exact layout of every sort of plant was to go on there. I just needed to find the sort of right reference material, and then they were obviously given a rough drawing of the ones that I'd found, and we went from there. Amends, always be prepared for amends, because you are going to have them from time to time. So with the first Brewdog label, the designers decided that they wanted to replace the nutmeg that they'd asked me to illustrate. And this was right in the centre of the illustration. And the nutmeg is the sort of split yellow sort of spiced fruit that you can see on the right here. I think they decided when they looked at the full composition that it was quite overbearing, and maybe the oranges would be a stronger sort of ingredient and very recognizable on the label. So after carefully putting all of that work together on one piece of paper, I had to do some oranges, and this is how they looked. So on the left is the orange illustration that I gave to them. So again, a spot illustration cut to white, so they could very easily cut that out and change the background digitally. And this is the finished product, which I love. It was, yeah, a really lovely bottle label and very successful for them.
Okay, so if you were listening carefully, Sarah Jane mentioned her use of gouache. In October, Sarah Morrish gave us a comprehensive overview of a gouache, actually, and the versatility of this medium. Sarah is known for her pen and ink work. She's written a brilliant book on it, but she is very versatile herself, actually. So she explained what gouache is. She gave us an overview of her equipment that she uses, and also painting techniques at a glance. Sorry, I'm whistling through these, but like I say, you can pause them when you watch the recording. Let's hear a little bit from Sarah as she talks about how she enjoys painting fungi.
One of my favourite subjects to illustrate in gouache is fungi, and I have a little Strathmore toned tan, I think it is, sketchbook that I do my fungi sketches in. I just dip into it each autumn and record a few species that I found. So this is tawny grisette, and you can see me painting that. This is primrose brittlegill. You can get some lovely sort of effects, especially with paler stems, and also when it comes to painting the gills as well, and when you dissect a fungi. And these are two pieces from last year. So this is the bronze bolete, and this is done on the Clairefontaine multi-techniques paper. And then I think this is done on the grey version of that paper as well. So birch polypore. And then this is the video that I'm now going to show you. Now, painting this fungi, this is called Jelly Baby. I think you can tell why. So I'm very lucky that I live near the New Forest National Park, which is one of the best places in Europe for fungi. I go out fungi hunting myself, but I work really closely with some fabulous photographers that allow me to use their images as well. And this is one of them. This is the Jelly Baby fungi. So this is me painting the Jelly Baby fungi. It's sped up. So you will see there, when you watch the recording, you'll be able to pause it and you can see the consistency of the paint. The way I describe it, it's like single cream. Okay, so if you're familiar with single cream in the UK, or if you have it elsewhere, it's not as thick as double cream, and it's not like water, but it has a little bit of strength to it. You can see here, if I was painting this in watercolour on white paper, my washes would be a lot paler. And here I'm using a Rosemary & Co spotter brush size 4 for the initial washes.
I'm really sorry, but that's all we've got time for. But not everyone works in watercolour, and Janie Pirie talked to us about how to get the best out of coloured pencils.
When I am drawing a subject, I never ever draw straight onto good art paper, because even one bit of erasing, and of course there is going to be erasing because no one ever gets it right first time. So I draw on any pieces of scrap paper that I can find. You know, I use layout pads. Sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I grab a piece of paper from the printer if it's only something A4 size, and I sketch very fast on that paper, and then I can erase and then hone it and make it so that it's perfect. When I've done that, I trace it with very fine tracing paper, turn the tracing over and do the other side, then turn it back the right way and rub it down onto good art paper. And I use for that a Dresden decoupage tool. If you haven't seen one, you don't know what they are, this is one. There we go. And this is, it's like a little baby hockey stick, metal hockey stick, and it's got the perfect surface for rubbing tracings down onto good art paper without damaging or denting the actual paper. And it means that your tracing stays very clean. So just like I said, I've got a few examples. So this was a couple of plums on a branch which I drew late last year while I was up in the Lake District. This part was showing someone a little bit of quick colour work using one of the little tools that I'm going to show you later, but my drawing at the time was just a clean drawing and I was able to rub out. And then this was my tracing, which you can see there. So that's traced on both sides, and then you rub it down, obviously the right way, onto good art paper, and this was the result. And I was really, really pleased with that.
Let me show you some more examples of Janie's work. She's particularly good at fruit, but I think this cabbage is fantastic, and bearing in mind this is coloured pencil, it is fantastic. And some shiny cherries. But I'm quite proud that these talks are cover a range of medium, and Yanny actually prints directly from plant material. So she gave us a short history of this technique, which is called nature printing. These were actually currency. I think these were notes with plant prints on them. And these are some examples of her work, her early work. And she also does a lot of work on glass. So you can see nature printing here on glass in combination with other techniques. But here she's layered up with different greys, these prints directly from the ferns and the grasses you can see here. But actually, I really like these simple but beautiful prints which are made directly from the leaves. So how is this done, I think you might be asking?
Okay, so you can see me there using the watercolour on the leaf first. So I have a pressed leaf, I'm sponging on the watercolour, and I haven't diluted the watercolour, but the sponge is damp. And on the right-hand side, you can see the plate with the black ink where I've rolled out the ink really thin. So there's only a very, very small amount of black ink on the plate. It's actually water-based ink, so you can use that too. It works very well as well. So then I'm picking up my leaf and laying it with the ink side down onto the plate, and piece of newsprint, and then using the roller over the back. And what that does, it means that only the raised parts of the leaf pick up ink, because I don't want to cover up the color that I've applied earlier. So then carefully lifting the leaf and laying it on my little piece of acetate. You can see I have registration marks above that. So just getting it in place. So you need to plan that your piece is going to be in reverse when you print it. So think ahead. So this is my damp etching paper. So you're laying that in water for a little while and then taking the excess water off it before you print. A bit of newsprint, and then rub and rub and rub again. So you're holding it firmly, but the damp paper will suck itself onto the acetate. and then you're rubbing it so that you can feel the definition of the leaf through the paper. And then I'm going around the edge of the acetate, because I want to imprint that as well. So you've got a little impression. And then just for luck, rub a little more, because you never know what you might have missed. And you will find that it'll, the softness of your hand will actually embed the leaf in the paper quite nicely. So once you've done that, take your paper away. We're lifting up, and this is the leaf has stuck itself to the paper. So then we lift that off, and you could use that a few times, and there you've got your little print. So you can see the sponged effect, but you can also get quite nice detail of the veins.
So a completely different technique than most of us have used. Christiane Fashek, her passion is actually for lichens, and she has developed a way of scaling them up. She started by doing them life size and then decided that scaling up was the way to go. So if you have a look, you can see the relative size of the original specimen on the right of these pictures that I'm quickly whizzing through. These are often depicted in coloured pencil, but sometimes she combines that with watercolour. She's going to talk to us about how she scales up.
Now that I have a specimen in hand of lichen that I need to possibly scale up, I must draw it and potentially magnify it. And these are my proportional dividers. I've seen other artists have them in this talk series. They're fantastic. They're my most important tool. At the bottom left of this drawing is an acorn cap. And if I wanted to scale it up 5 times, I would slide the marker, this marker here, using the screw on the front leg to the number 5, and that is the number 5, and then hold the compass points at the small end of the X to the width of the acorn. And then the large end of the X would automatically give me 5 times the width of that acorn cap. Awesome. Huge savings of time. These are always on my desk. You can play spot the divider in these photos and all through the rest of the presentation, pretty much. So as an architect, I'm facile with reductive scale, making things smaller, but it was a revelation to use magnified scale to see and to draw what I felt was missing during my lichens on a twig 1-to-1 phase. So when choosing a final scale, I consider the dimensions of the actual size specimen, what I intend to focus on in the painting, and how large it will need to be for me to convey the lichen's characteristics through my medium. On the far left is an annotated reference photo of the lichen grouping. At this stage, I had hypotheses about the species associated with each letter. In the first step, I drew the lichen group right here at actual size. And then I laid a grid over the top of that. It happens to be in centimeters, recording the greatest height and width dimensions. When using proportions, it doesn't matter whether you use imperial or metric measures until you have to lay out the drawing on final paper. In the center, I drew the grid 3 times larger and then followed by moving square to square and filling in the rest of the lichen. On the right, I drew a final grid twice that size again and filled it in. Final drawing is 6 times the original. And as I tell my students, you're essentially making a botanical dot to dot. So on top of the technical grid drawing that we just saw, I overlay tracing paper and make a more expressive drawing that retains dimensional accuracy while combining all of the information I've accumulated: species characteristics, directionality, shadows, voids, textures, and I use line weight to inform me about edges and depth. Some of this is scribbled in a strange shorthand, but I'm the only one who needs to understand it, so that's fine. I call this a botanical cartoon or blueprint. The more of these that I make, the more they resemble topographic maps.
Okay, a lot of work goes into that, isn't it? The last talk of each year, I bring together 3 or more leading botanical artists to compare notes. And so one of the questions I asked them this year was, what piece of equipment could you not live without? And like Christiane, Lucy Smith is devoted to her proportional dividers, and she explained how she uses them. Let's hear from Carol and Elaine as they talk about their favourite piece of kit.
But what I'll talk about today is this XL executive knife that I first got from Jean Emmons. She gifted me one. You can see it's got a really good point, and it also has this little clicker here, so it's retractable. And the way I use this, since you probably couldn't do this on paper, but vellum is a pretty tough surface, I use it to make these little adjustments and highlights along edges. You can scratch in some veining that you missed out on originally. I don't use the knife excessively, but it really is handy for a few of these minor touch-ups that you need to do to bring out little details. And then right here, say you want to move an edge over, you can just scrape that paint right out. And this, what I'm doing here is just sort of lightening up this vein that I painted in previously, just by scratching off the very surface of the paint itself. And then you can put in a little vein there. You can pop in little highlights with that pen, with that blade, and you'll see along here where I can just scrape in a little highlight. If you do end up pulling up a little of the tissue of the paper, of the vellum, you can then just soften it with a little wet brush. And this is a great way to use it. There's so many layers of paint on there that, and you can just really pull it up if you want to put in any very fine details.
Well, my piece of equipment, it's really both magnets and magnetic whiteboards, of which I have several at several different sizes. So I am mad about magnets. So for it, how would I use it? So for instance, when I'm working on a graphite piece, which I don't often do, but do enjoy, and you know, your hand gets it can easily smudge the graphite. Well, I like to use a couple of magnets to hold tracing paper underneath my hand, so that when I put the pencil in contact with the surface, I can be sure there's no transfer of graphite. I've been working most recently on a lot of small paintings, as I mentioned, that are, I have these little dried specimens or even feathers. Now, you can see one of my magnetic whiteboards here, and even a feather can be attached with a magnet. What else can we do with them? Well, you can buy magnets in all shapes and sizes. Some of them make great holders. So you can put these little plastic test tubes into them and put your specimens in them. Or you can even thread your specimens between two of them. And I have loads of little clips and hooks as well.
Thank you. And thank you to Joyce, who's just mentioned that she, although Carol didn't talk about her light, Joyce has bought the light that Carol recommended, and she says it's revolutionised her atelier. So that's great. Thanks, Joyce, for that comment. Crystal Shin spoke to us back in July. Now, Crystal is multidisciplinary. Yes, well, she works mainly in coloured pencil, but she has also worked in graphite drawing. I'm tripping over my words now. Pen and ink, watercolour and coloured pencil. She sees colour in a particular way, and she encouraged us to look beyond our usual understanding of colour and be sensitive about how we set things up, for example. She then took us through the process depicting this leaf, and she too has a special tool that she uses at the start of her coloured pencil work.
So here I'm gonna play some videos of how I actually create the autumn leaf. So first of all, I used the incising tool to create the veins. So I use actually incising technique quite often for various subjects, not only for the leaves, but also I use it for flowers and fruits and butterflies and lots of things. So So this one, incising is particularly useful for veins, the prominent veins on the leaves. So really tiny, small veins, I'm not gonna use incising tools. I'm gonna probably just draw around it. So in this demo, I'm actually using 3 different size of nips of an embossing tool. So I'm putting quite a lot of pressure, and then also using different size of nips based on how prominent I wanna be, or I wanna go for this particular section.
Okay, no time to watch what happens next, but hopefully if you saw that talk, you will remember how she proceeds. Exploring botanical collage show another style of work as well. Penny Brown trained actually as a set designer, but before she discovered botanical art, she'd also illustrated many other sorts of books. But she was encouraged in 2013 to get involved in this exhibition, where each of the artists took inspiration from someone from history. Penny had come across the work of Mary Delaney. Now, Mary Delaney developed a process of using cut paper for her illustrations, and this inspired Penny to use paper collage for her exhibition entry.
So, having done my research and got my influences, it was time to start on the first collage. I decided to study an echinacea. This one was growing in the garden. I liked its strong sculptural shape. I also liked the arrangement of the petals around that central cone. And I was very intrigued to find out how I was going to render all the tiny details of that cone in little bits of cut paper. So I started by doing quite detailed tonal studies, as you can see here, to work out the shape and the structure of the petals and the shape and structure of the leaves. As you can see, I've also started to stick little colour swatches on here. This is a close-up of the tonal drawing that I did of the petals. And here you can start to see all my little scribbly notes and little diagrams of how I'm going to do the cone. And here is starting to assemble the pieces of the collage on the black paper. And you can see how I build up the layers of the different colours. So you've got the dark layers of the bud looking behind the lighter layers. And this is the finished collage. I was quite broad with the colour that I put onto the stems, those sort of slashes of yellow ochre colour. That was very much how Mary Delaney did the highlighting on the stems. I thought it was quite useful to use her technique for this early one. I'm looking at the cone now and I think I could have done it better than that, but anyway, there you go.
That was one of Penny's early work, but here is a bluebell image. You can see the progress work in progress on the left with all the different bits, cut pieces, and the final image on the right. Very striking, very graphic, very different from a lot of the ways that some of us are working. Here are just a couple more very quickly before we move on. I realise we've got about 5 minutes left. So Francois Sockham-May has many strings to his bow, and like many artists started out in a different genre. So he was aspirationally wanted to be a comic book artist. But he does love plants. He loves working with botanists to search for his carnivorous plants, which are his favourite sort of plants, and here he is looking for them in their natural habitat. So he described his progress as a scientific illustrator. He was very humble and honest about the times that he made mistakes and how he learnt to improve. And he described the errors that we're seeing here very quickly. And here is the corrected illustration. But all this really paid off because last year he was ultimately awarded, as it were, the 2024 Margaret Flockton Award for Scientific Illustration, which he was really keen to get. So he's done really well. He is still a taxonomist, a scientific illustrator, a botanical artist, and a French literature teacher. So you will find that botanical artists very often can't just be doing one thing, and they have to balance their artistic career with other work, as does Helen Cousins. So Helen Cousins has been pursuing botanical art alongside training in medicine. So here you can see in 2016, she not only graduated from the SBA diploma course on the left, but she also finished her training as a medical doctor. She explained how she split her time between these passions, but sometimes these two things came together. As in these illustrations, which I think are up in a hospice where she was working. But as a botanical artist, she teaches, she's designed stationery, and she has a very large following on social media. We're just going to listen in now as she describes one of her favourite painting techniques.
So yeah, wet on wet technique, my favourite. The way I teach this is, I think, where people struggle with it, and where I think initially struggled with it as well, is the right amount of water on the paper. So I describe it as the paper, hopefully you can see it there, it's glistening, but it's not puddling. If people are struggling and their paper's too dry, I say, well, make it so there's a little bit of puddling, and then just pull back a little bit with a damp brush and lift off a little bit more of that water. So that's kind of the level of water that you need. But hopefully you can see here that paint, because the paper is a nice dampness, that when I'm putting the paint down, it's flowing and it's bleeding really beautifully out into the paper and giving these really soft lines.
Okay, so to complete our exploration of the range of media used by botanical artists, we're going to finish with Guy Eves. So Guy is an artist who works in graphite pencil. I'm just going to show you this illustration in progress. So here's his original line drawing of a hydrangea and the first tonal layers, and then building the image up, strengthening the contrast and the tonal values until this, which is his final drawing. He gave us a quick tour of his studio and the different equipment that he uses, and he also told us how he sharpens his pencils and why.
I've got across there, I've got my pencils, and then down here is where I sharpen my pencils. So this is the bit, my drawing board will be up here. This is a little box down there. That's a strip of this wet or dry sandpaper. The P600 is the one you need. There is a 400 and a 200, etc. But they don't give you the fine point that this very, very fine sandpaper does. So that's a strip 2.5 centimeters wide that I tape across there, and then this is a piece of kitchen roll. So I will sharpen the pencil by just rubbing it side by side and twizzling it in my fingers to get the point, and then I will then rub the dust off on the kitchen roll there. If you don't do that, then quite often you'll put your pen to the paper and then you'll start moving it, and then all the dust falls off the pencil and it's all over your paper. So, and then you're getting a putty rubber to try and lift it up and take it off. Okay. I will use several different shapes of pencil tip. So first off, you've got well, I sharpen it to a pinhead for most things. Actually, when I'm drawing up and when I'm layering down the base tonal line work. Then often any of you, my students from the distant learning course, you'll know what I'm talking about because I've said it over and again. Like a little screwdriver. Now this is really good because if you draw a line with a point, the point comes off very quickly. Sometimes it can snap, you just get that little pop sound and the ends come off. If you do it this way and you've got long leaves to do and you're trying to do these long veins, say like on a iris leaf, if you use it and stroke it that way with the fine point, that point will stay sharp for very, very much longer, and it works really well. It keeps the line straight because I'm digging it into the paper, and you get a very clean, long line. And then if you stroke it the other way, you can then get a flat tone, which we'll talk about that one again as we move on.
I'm a really big fan of Guy's tree drawings, actually, as you can see one here. And I particularly like this one, which I saw at the SBA exhibition a couple of years ago, and it won awards, a couple of awards at least, I think, and it was the most amazing detailed drawing. And here you can see 4 of his tree drawings together at a show in good company. So they were hung alongside Monet's and a Constable and Gainsborough. Okay, the end. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So yes, is it the end though? No, absolutely not. I've already booked some speakers for this coming year. I'm just going to flash these before your eyes. So quite renowned botanical artists who work in lots of different ways, and I'm going to present us lots of new inspiring ideas about botanical art. So the programme should be very fascinating. I would love for you to join me. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks with Laura Silburn.